Hiya Toonheads, DBK here, and welcome to another Toonland Inquirer MiniVid. Today, we're gonna talk about the Tom and Jerry movie. Isn't that exciting? Just as a full disclaimer, at this very point in the video, I actually haven't seen the new Tom and Jerry movie yet, as I thought it would make for an interesting type of review to see my perspective, connections, and whatnot going into this movie. So how did we get here? Well, this is a movie that's been in the planning since 2009. Following the success of the live-action CG Alvin and the Chipmunks movie that made a decent percentage of humanity question God's existence, Warner Brothers announced a plan to cash in on the success with a live-action CG Tom and Jerry movie. And originally this was going to be headed by Dan Lin and screenplayed by Eric Ravning. So indeed we were very close to one point getting CG models along the lines of this. How charming. But evidently nothing came out of that initially, until 2015 when it was announced that the Tom and Jerry movie was just going to become fully animated. And nothing came of that either, and now it's a live-action CG movie again. So now who's attached to this movie as director? Someone by the name of Tim Story. You have no idea how many times I was this close to referring to him as Toy Story. He's best known for Barbershop in 2002, the Fantastic Four movies, as well as more recently, the Ride-Along movies. Yeah, so with the exception of the first one, I think you have a decent idea of his track record, or lack thereof. Anyway, yes, Tim Story of all people is now involved with a new Tom and Jerry movie as director, and in its live-action CG form again as initially intended, which naturally got a lot of people worried, including myself for obvious reasons. At least that was the prevailing mindset until early November 2020, when small parts of the trailer got leaked. In fact, I remember on Twitter seeing clips that showed mainly the animated bits where Tom and Jerry were doing their thing, which provoked two reactions. One being interest because, let's face it, the animation is very good in this movie, capturing the look and the squash and stretch movement very well, despite being CG. So it was like seeing 2D drawings transferred into CG. Or I really should just say hand-drawn transferred into CG. I'm trying to get in the habit of not using 2D, 3D so loosely. The other being skepticism, because at that point in time, we still haven't received the full trailer, and to be fair, you've got to see the full thing to be able to make full judgment. But then shortly after the leak, the full trailer came out, which provoked two more reactions. One being disappointment, and the other were people from the site going, "Ha! I told you this movie was gonna suck! I told you so!" And likely in that respective order as well. Without pointing fingers to any of those statements, let me give you my take. We live in a universe that not only repeatedly proved why live-action CG hybrids are a terrible idea, but this is a universe that also allowed this to exist.
The greatest gift in life's a friend. He's a daily dividend. Be like us and start a trend. Be friends to the end.
And don't get me started on the 13 direct-to-video Tom and Jerry movies that have been mass-produced from 2002 to 2017. Sure, they weren't all bad, but let's not forget that their legacy in the DTV world was capped with this. Now, maybe this is stemmed from years of built-up pessimism of turning IPs meant for 7-minute shorts into feature-length movies, and or me trying to soften the blow going into this movie as much as possible, but shouldn't us now getting the usual brand of meh be a good thing, or at least a huge step in the right direction for Tom and Jerry in general? Then again though, going from the new Tom and Jerry shorts on HBO Max to this is going to be such a huge quality whiplash. Anyway, this is my very long-winded way of saying that I am not expecting anything from this movie. In fact, I am setting my expectations very low. But even then, it can't be any worse than the unfitting cash-in on the Disney Renaissance and or that Gene Wilder insulting garbage, right? Right? I guess there's only one way to find out. So here I am having watched Tom and Jerry parentheses 2021. Right off the bat, it's a bad movie, but still better than that 1992 movie and Tom and Jerry and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. This movie was the type of bad that I was more or less prepared to see, and given the lengthy production history dating back to 2009 in light of Alvin and the Chipmunks' success, it was quite inevitable. I will admit though, I spent much of the first half hour of this movie shouting, "Shut up!" But as soon as the main human character Kayla teams up with Tom and tries to capture Jerry, that's when the movie becomes almost alright. Emphasis on the word almost. First, to reiterate what I said in the prologue, the animation is very good, capturing the signature cartoony look and movement very well, unlike other live-action CG efforts. Bringing me to my next point, this might be the very first live-action CG movie where every animal is actually animated rather than just the title characters. Even the dead fucking fish!
I wanna go back and mommy!
Nonetheless, I do appreciate the consistency on that front. And on that note, Droopy does make a cameo in this movie. If you remember the 1992 film, my condolences first of all, but you can probably guess where he will appear in this movie. And I'm sorry to keep referring to that film and the last DTV movie, but one thing that the new Tom and Jerry movie actually does better is incorporate Tom and Jerry in a way that doesn't make them feel nearly as shoehorned. Here the plot actually calls for Tom and Jerry to appear and cause mayhem, and every scene with them and other animated animals provide for this movie's much better moments. It's just too damn bad that these bits are tied to a plot that is pretty damn bad. Any parts with none of the animated characters interacting, I guarantee will bore the hell out of you. And unsurprisingly, they take up a pretty damn big part of this movie. Very generic setting for one. I mean, cartoon characters traveling into the big city. Where in Colonel Sanders' name have we heard that before? Then you have the generic underlying plot of Kayla, who's a young lost millennial who cons her way into a position that assists the event manager at a hotel. And they actually do bring up the millennial aspect at one point outright in this movie.
I figured out who you are.
Who am I?
You're one of those millennials that thinks they can get whatever they want, whenever they want, without working for it. Preferably with free shipping.
Tom and Jerry come into the picture when Kayla needed the former to get rid of the latter, all tying around a wedding that the hotel staff needs to make sure is pulled off perfectly. Which means, yes, at more than one occasion, we get insight into a couple's relationship issues. In a movie just called Tom and Jerry. Warner Brothers, let me emphasize, it's bad enough that you have to shoehorn a message regarding excessive social media use near the end of the movie.
It's just hard. I mean, every morning I wake up and I look at my phone and my news feed is filled with people who are our age. Now they're succeeding at what they're doing.
Well, maybe we just need to stop comparing ourselves to everybody and just work for it.
And make us care about a pathological liar's aspirations throughout most of it. But let's really think about this for a second. What makes you think that we want to hear about relationship issues of side characters in a movie simply called Tom and Jerry? Where does any of this connect well together? And if the general synopsis of this film doesn't excite you, it comes as no surprise that the characters don't fare well either. In fact, every human character in this movie is so generic, dull, one-dimensional, and or stupid that it actually reignited my childhood dream in becoming a cartoon character. Well, technically that dream never died, but I spent hours after this movie researching the possibilities of gaining regenerative abilities from toxic waste just to separate myself from humans as much as possible. Kayla, as mentioned in passing, is the generic young lost adult in New York City trying to find her way, and again is a pathological liar. Terrence is the scheming event manager who figured out Kayla's shtick early on, but somehow thinks he's able to bar her from employment within New York City altogether.
And I've clawed my way all the way to the middle. And I don't intend on stopping there, okay? You better hope this little cat plan works, because if it doesn't, I'll make sure you never work in New York City again.
Let me repeat that. This event manager alone somehow has the authority/connections to put Kayla on a blacklist to every other employer in a city that not only has nearly 8.5 million people, but also an economy that spans hundreds, if not thousands, of different industries. Why the hell should I be questioning logic within the movie that doesn't end with Kayla getting drop-kicked by the woman she stole the resume from? Then you have the soon-to-be wedded couple that the hotel is providing for, Ben and Prita. The fact that I'm mentioning them here is further testament to what's wrong with this movie.
Again, we don't want to hear about relationship issues of characters we're never going to hear from again in a fucking Tom and Jerry project.
Then you have Mr. Dubrow, the wealthy owner of the hotel, which by the way is called Royal Gate Hotel in case anyone cared. Missing the obvious, scolding others for injecting any sense of logic in a situation, you can probably guess the type of character we're dealing with here. And with that, I think you get the picture of why the first half hour of this movie was almost unbearable for me. Tom and Jerry and the other animated characters really do save the movie from becoming an absolute nightmare. The last thing to mention about the Tom and Jerry movie that absolutely bothered me was the background music. Almost like the type you would hear in action spy movies. work, especially for Tom and Jerry. And don't get me started on the overuse of rap and auto-tune music, especially the former throughout this movie. In fact, to further testify how horrible the first 30 minutes of this movie was, this is how they decided to kick it off.
Can I kick it? Can I kick it? Can I kick it? Can I kick it?
Mr. Story, this is Tom and Jerry, not right along.
There was even one part of the movie where Tom was playing the piano and singing a serenade to a female cat nearby, like you would see occasionally in the original shorts, which looked like a good throwback at first, until they did this.
Oh, don't you know, baby? Little girl, don't you know?
So overall, there's no mincing words. Tom and Jerry parentheses 2021 is a bad movie and I don't recommend it. Sure, the animated bits are quite decent, but it's nowhere near enough to offset the fact that Tom and Jerry's antiques are tied to a very generic plot and unlikable characters. At the end of the day though, what the hell are we expecting from yet another live-action CG hybrid based on Tom and Jerry, both of which never had a good record when translating into feature-length movies? I should emphasize again that Tom and Jerry parentheses 2021 is not the absolute worst. I would still rather take this over the 1992 movie, and again, the last direct-to-video movie. Hell, I'll even take this over 5 more episodes of Lunatics Unleashed. Here's the best way to close my thoughts on this. Don't go into this movie expecting anything good by any stretch of the imagination, but rather see this as a potential huge stepping stone for this animation style. For all this movie's flaws, the hand-drawn like CG animation was done very well and can potentially open the door for fully animated features in this style. You bet I would watch the hell out of a movie like that.